Welcome back to New Day Northwest. My next guest is a retired urologist who had a front row seat to history. Dr. Lester Thompson kept a journal through college at a time when students of color like him accounted for a tiny fraction of the student body. His memories are the subject of a new book called Lucky Medicine, a fascinating look at student life just before the sweeping social changes of the 1960s. Welcome to New Day, Dr. Thompson. We are so glad to have you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
I should say neighbor. We live in the same neighborhood. It was actually Rich Marriott, our meteorologist, who introduced us. I'm so glad to have you here to talk about this book.
Well, I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
Well, I want to get to the meat of the story, which takes place in Indiana. But how did you wind up in Seattle as a kid from the Midwest?
Well, my wife always criticizes me for taking too much time to tell stories. So the short version is that I grew up in Indiana. I went to Indiana University in undergrad and medical school, did an internship in Indianapolis, my hometown. Ended up in the Navy for a couple of years, and by the time they sent me there, I had some friends in Oakland. I was stationed initially in Oxnard, California, before I went to Vietnam. And so I used to drive to the Bay Area to see my friends in Oakland because I was young, single, had more money than I ever had made at that point in my life. And, 6 hours, no big deal. So when I went back to my urology residency in Wisconsin, after 4 years in Wisconsin, I said, I'm done with the Midwest. I got to get out of here.
Yeah.
And I wanted to go back to the Bay Area, but a friend of mine had a practice, actually ENT in Lakewood. So he said, why don't you look at the Northwest? I said, like where?
I know, I would imagine it would seem
Seattle.
really far.
And I said, it rains there a lot. They had a World's Fair. He says, yeah, that was. Well, I had met one guy who was the only black urologist in town at that point. And I wrote him a letter, because this is like 1974. And he said, come on out. And I hit here one of those Chamber of Commerce days. Beautiful, the mountains are out. And
that's when I came too.
I said, where have they been hiding this place? Well, anyway, I was looking for a job. Nobody was looking for a partner. And so he said, well, why don't you go look at group health? And I said, what's that? And he described it. And I said, it's probably like the VA. I don't want to work there. He says, no, it's fine.
Group health.
So I literally drove up to the facility on Capitol Hill, walked into the medical staff office and said, I understand you're looking for a urologist. I'd like to apply. I guess sit down. Never happened nowadays.
Well, I want to get to the book. You started writing a journal at the University of Indiana in 1961, and you decided to keep it. How often did you look at it, and when did you know it would be a good book?
Well, I kept the journal for the 3 years I was an undergraduate, and when I finished it, I put it away and didn't look at it for 50 years. Because I thought I just wanted to remember college as I had experienced it. I had this kind of naive impression that it would really be pretty cool. Turned out it actually was. So the next thing that triggered my thought about making a book was the movie Animal House. And you say, well, how does that figure into this?
It's like, I gotta hear this.
Well, if you remember that movie with John Belushi and those crazy, it's a story of these fraternity guys who just raised a lot of cane. And I said, if you take these people and you put them in Indiana when I was a freshman, you put them in my fraternity, they were all black. I know them all because they were all my fraternity.
I gotta ask, America, when you were in school, when you were in medical school, the United States was on the brink of the civil rights movement. What barriers did you run into as a young medical student at the time and eventually a young doctor?
Well, the first one actually was before I got to medical school. This is in the book, and I'll just quickly paraphrase it. The last segment of your application process is the in-person interview. And there were two guys, they were from the Department of Microbiology, both white men. The day that I had my interview on campus, I had forgotten, believe it or not, that was the day. And so I had to run back to the fraternity house, which is about a mile, put on my stuff, and I didn't own a suit. All I had was a loud Madras sport coat, if you remember what that looked like. So I said, well, okay, so I go back.
This is what you wore?
Yeah, so I've got a tie and a shirt and slacks and this Madras sport coat. So I walk into the union building room where we're waiting. It's like a wake. I mean, everybody's in a dark suit, they're all smoking, and I'm thinking, oh boy, I'm in trouble now. So they invite me in, and these two guys are sitting there, and one guy's kind of mid-50s, round face, wire rim glasses, kind of patronizing smile.
Yeah.
And he says, the first question he asked me, he says, do you know how to dance?
Wow.
And I thought, yeah. And then he named 2 or 3 dances that I had no idea how he ever knew they existed, because he's a white guy, right? He said, you know how to do any of those dances? And I thought, yeah. And I said, am I going to have to do a yassa boss? And, and then he stopped, and he went on.
Interesting.
And I thought, I have no idea what this was about, whether, this black guy in his loud sport coat.
But this is one of the many things that you experienced that nobody else probably would have.
I don't imagine so. Microaggressions, I suppose.
Absolutely. Well, I cannot wait you have so many great stories. Lucky Medicine, I cannot wait to read all these wonderful stories with you. Can't wait to have you back on the show.
Well, I'd love to come back. Thank you.
And share some more. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
It's my pleasure as well to be here.